Hello, this is the RPG Crawler, and it is time, once again, for a shelf of many things, where I take a look at independent and small press, tabletop role-playing games, and role-playing game accessories. This time, I'm taking a look at a revised, updated, and expanded version of a product that I've already covered in the past. Written by Omer Golan-Joel, Richard Hazelwood, Josh Peters, and Robert L.S. Weaver, and published by Stellagama Publishing, who were kind enough to send me this review copy, Cepheus Deluxe was released in September of 2021. Available in both PDF and print-on-demand format through DriveThruRPG, Cepheus Deluxe is based on the 2D6 OGL Cepheus Engine, itself an open version of the one used in Traveler. It is one of a number of Cepheus Engine-derived systems offered by Stellagama Publishing, and like its predecessor, Cepheus Lite, seeks to present a system for sci-fi role-playing that incorporates a sort of old-school feel to enable the use of older sci-fi RPG material. However, Cepheus Deluxe attempts to maintain that feel while providing a more fleshed-out system and better compatibility with general Cepheus Engine-derived material. As always, I will go through the format, give a brief summary of the contents, and then conclude with my thoughts on it at the end. I will also try to touch upon the main differences between Cepheus Deluxe and Cepheus Lite for those who are used to that other system and looking to upgrade. Physically, the book is a typical softcover with a full color cover and black and white interior pages. The cover is simple, clean white text over a straightforward planet-side photo illustration fitting for the genre, while the interior layout consists of very simple, straightforward, two-column black and white text with clear and evident section headings, as well as inline tables where necessary, and a mix of inline and full-page black and white illustrations in a very old-school style, much like its predecessor. In terms of actual content, the book is split up into 20 major sections, as well as 5 appendices, plus an index and after material. Some small subsections in Cepheus Lite have been expanded into their own chapters here. There is an introduction, basic rules, skills, and then character generation rules, traits, equipment lists, environmental hazard rules, personal and vehicle combat, psionics, starship operations, trade and smuggling rules, ship design and construction, space combat, common spacecraft design examples, starship encounters, world creation rules, social encounters, Xeno fauna encounters and generation rules, and general referee advice. A collection of adventure seeds follows before the appendices cover the various sources of inspiration, the universal world profile, optional rules to cheat death and bring characters back, as well as an appendix of playable aliens, and then finally the legal material. The introduction goes over the basics of RPGs in general, and then Cepheus Deluxe in particular, laying out what's necessary to play. Like most Cepheus systems, it simply uses D6s. There's also a list of what's been expanded and changed since Cepheus Lite. This is fairly important since a few critical changes have been made to make it more generally compatible with Cepheus Engine material. Skill throws now have characteristic dice modifiers on them, and the old school UPP and UWP are now completely optional. In fact, I'd say they're optional to the point of being shelved completely, because honestly they barely make an appearance in the rules, whereas they were pretty front and center in Cepheus Lite. The introduction concludes with background on the authors and publisher. The section on basic rules follows, which explains the basic game mechanics. Cepheus uses a 2d6 versus difficulty number system with the aforementioned change from the Cepheus Lite system. There's also rules for collaboration, allowing multiple people to contribute skills to a test, and then the advantage system to grant a benefit on a roll. There's also a fatigue effect for exhausted characters. There's an optional hero point system encompassing both individual and group hero points, which allow for rerolls of certain dice rolls. I actually kind of like the group hero point system simply because it has a mechanic in it that gives hero points to the group for people that fail spectacularly, so you won't have one person's bad luck bogging down the whole group. The skills chapter dives right into explaining the skill system, including the basic ranks and the differences between Cepheus Engine core skills and those in this system, as well as giving some guidelines for level 0 skills or basic background/hobby level skills. There's also the skill list itself, with each skill listed with a short description of what it covers, as well as examples on its use. Languages are touched on here, and the chapter closes with the skill advancement system, which functions as the character advancement system for the game, which allows the purchase of higher level skills for experience earned during play. There's also an optional rule on advancing basic characteristics in a similar manner. The character generation chapter follows, and this is actually the first time we see the basic characteristics actually spelled out in the system. Cepheus Deluxe uses a standard array for character generation rather than randomized dice rolls, although I'm sure you could probably adapt some to this system, with the given numbers assigned to basic characteristics. There's strength, dexterity, endurance, intelligence, education, and social standing. The dice mods for characteristics of various levels is listed here to support the modification to rolls for skill checks. Rules for making characteristic throws follow, and the next step in character generation includes obtaining basic skill ranks and skills based on the character's homeworld. You then select a career. Similar to Cepheus Light and the system it seeks to emulate, characters may advance through a career track, gaining a basic number of skills and then rolling randomly to see what happens to them during each term of their career, after which they can either go for another term or muster out. This provides a variety of experience levels and age levels for beginning characters. It should be noted that this method has been made somewhat less lethal than its predecessors, as it was very easy to die in Cepheus Light during character creation. Now, it's still a possibility here, but despite the fact that they've dialed it way back, but that possibility is very, very low unless you really push your luck or you use the optional Iron Man rules. You are instead more likely to have a starting injury or other issue that can give a beginner character some flavor. Now, each career is laid out in the following pages. There's the career's name, the list of viable skills that they can acquire, ranks and the benefits of obtaining a rank that each career brings, and then the events that can occur during each term of that career. There's the agent career, the army career, the belter career, which is sort of like a prospector or trader. There's the colonist. There is the elite, which are the cream of the crop style social influencers. There's the marines. There's merchants, and then there's navy, pirates, rogues. You've got your scholars and your scouts, and that about wraps it up. This has a lead-in to a general life event, which can be triggered during your character creation in general. And then there's the rules for mustering out, or basically getting out of your career and becoming an adventurer, which actually gives a large number of options for obtaining ships of various sizes. Although this does require devotion to a career, it's difficult to have more than one or two characters do it. And it does not give you the ship basically willy-nilly free of charge. There are some drawbacks. Now, there is a aging effect in case you end up using a large number of terms before mustering out, and then there's a prison table to roll on if your character spends a stint in jail during character creation, which is a possibility in some instances. There's an injury table for what happens if they get injured on the job, which basically replaces the old instant death kind of thing. And they offer some options for repairing injuries that you've got just in case. The chapter closes with an example of character creation, and this is something that the prior book, the Cepheus Light book, did extremely well, as they put detailed examples after the end of each section, so you know how to actually, use the rules in question. I do like that. The traits chapter is next. Each character can create or can acquire traits during character creation or play. Traits generally have a category, a name, and a prerequisite, usually a number of ranks and skills, and then an effect. Now, these effects are generally just giving you advantage on rolls of a particular type or during particular tasks, although they may grant additional abilities or benefits depending on individual traits. And there are quite a few of them in quite a number of different categories. The equipment chapter starts off with the encumbrance system, and the equipment chapter is actually one of the largest in the books. Cepheus Deluxe uses a very abstract encumbrance system that basically counts total items versus a number derived from your basic characteristics. A quick examination of text levels follows, with equipment availability divided up into various levels based on the technology base of your individual worlds. You're not likely to find a starship on a world that's still in the Iron Age, for instance. Before any actual gear is given, the basic idea of living expenses is listed. Now, all prices here, or from here on out in the entire book, are given in credits, which are just an abstract sci-fi currency. The personal armor list is next, giving a list of various types of armor and their protection levels and encumbrance, as well as about a paragraph of description for each if you're not sure what that armor particularly is. The cybernetics section has been expanded drastically from Cepheus Light, offering more options, as well as dividing the cybernetic enhancements into grades depending on how invasive they are. Each has a tech level that is required, as well as a cost and a description of what they do and what benefits they have. There's also a cybernetic point cost associated with them that limits how many cybernetic enhancements a character can have before they start suffering penalties. The general equipment section simply offers a list of items and their costs and tech levels required that are pretty common for adventuring or just going out and exploring in general, and this is followed by descriptions thereof just in case you're not sure about it. The pharmaceuticals section similarly lists just the names and effects of various sample drugs, as well as their costs and their tech level required to make them. There are robots covered here in the equipment chapter as well. There's an entire system here for assembling robots out of various parts given, including the basic stats for the chassis of various sizes that then can be augmented and upgraded with various equipment. It's a nice little system that can be used to build a variety of drones and autonomous robots for play. The vehicles section is a list of example vehicles and their stat blocks. Vehicles have been tweaked a little bit in Cepheus Deluxe, specifically in how armor is dealt with, but also in a few other things. They're no longer a penetration value associated with different weapon types. Instead, all weapons have been normalized, and armor class has simply been abstracted into unarmored, light, and heavy armor for use in damaging systems during combat. The weapons section details the various aspects of weapons of various types, as well as their tech levels. For instance, you've got your melee weapons, you've got your common range weapons, and your energy weapons, and so forth. There's aspects given that define qualities of individual weapons that may have, such as their handedness, if it requires two hands to use, if it's got different fire modes like full auto and burst, and so forth. The weapons themselves have tech levels required listed so that you can know which type of world you'll need to look for them on, as well as costs, damage, aspects, and the descriptions in detail, as well as the magazines they can hold and the ammo cost per magazine where applicable. Weapons are given from the primitive spear all the way up through high-energy weapons and explosives, so that gives you a nice variety of things. After the equipment chapter is the environmental hazard chapter. This is a very short chapter that covers things that can harm the character, such as disease and poison, extreme temperatures, falling, radiation, starvation, and so forth. The radiation rules are especially useful considering that space is full of radiation. The personal and vehicle combat chapters detail the combat system itself. Now this covers everything shy of space combat. Combat in Cepheus Deluxe uses a 6-second round with initiative determined by a tactics throw, although there are some optional simultaneous round systems in play. Most combat deals with simple skill throws versus target numbers, and then you just take the result. Armor removes damage from any hit. Instead of doing damage directly to characteristics, characters have a stamina and a lifeblood system where stamina gets depleted first, and then lifeblood represents actual injuries that you take. It should be noted there is an optional armor rule in here that allows armor to be used as avoidance rather than mitigation if you're more comfortable with that sort of system. There are rules for Frenzy, which basically allows a character in melee to mow through several mooks, various types of weapon fire, resolving blast-based explosions, dealing with ranged combat in various situations, and then a full-on grappling system. The healing rules basically allow for a quick recovery of stamina damage. Light wounds occur when less than half of your lifeblood points are removed and are easier to deal with, although they must be treated. Heavy wounds happen when more than half of the lifeblood points have been dealt and they require tending to in a proper clinic or hospital. While mortal trauma, when all lifeblood points are removed and you're effectively about to die, requires a full-on trauma ward and may be dealt with in the field with extreme penalty in an emergency. Now, amusingly enough, there is a little note in here that simply says that, people killed by Starship or vehicle scale weapons cannot be resuscitated. And I know it has its place in pitched battles. People are going to take shots from heavy weapons and such, but it also kind of brings an image to mind of the sort of conversation that might happen aboard a ship when, say, a gunner decides to fire a capital ship's full battery at just one single dude floating out there in a spacesuit. I mean, it's got to happen in these universes. You're out on a cruise or on patrol. Maybe you've had a bad day. Maybe your boss is riding you for a quota or something. And you see some dude out on EVA on some rock somewhere sampling an asteroid without a permit or something. And you're like, you know what? Screw that guy in particular. Boom. And I just have this. I wonder how much damage. I would have to do the math to find out how much damage your heavy ship weapons would do against a single unarmored dude. I might have to do that just as an example. Anyway, sorry about the distraction. After an example of personal combat, the vehicle combat section is next. It basically defaults to the personal combat rules, except that vehicle movement outside of enclosed spaces becomes something of a chase. And in fact, it can be used for non-combat chases as well. Chases are abstracted into a positioning system, which represents not the exact positions of vehicles, but rather which one has the upper hand in a moment's maneuvering and dictates which vehicles can attack one another, especially in multi-vehicle chases. This can be used not only for general chases, but also for twisting and turning dogfighting and the like. Information on specific types of chases are given, as well as various maneuvers that can be undertaken during the chase, and the various results of collisions. The rules for attacking vehicles and what happens when you penetrate a vehicle with heavy fire are given. They don't use hit point systems, but rather individual damage to systems in general. There's rules for dealing with repairs, as well as ground and Starship scale weapons versus vehicles as well, because again, you've got those multiple scales of weaponry to deal with. The chapter concludes with an example of vehicle combat, as many of them do. The chapter on Psionics has been moved into a main chapter from Cepheus Light and is greatly expanded upon. Yet they are completely optional, suited only for play if the referee approves them in their game. There are 5 psionic talents: awareness, clairvoyance, telekinesis, telepathy, and teleportation, each of which has a subset of abilities that can be manifested. Each of these individual actions costs a certain number of psi points, which you get from a static pool, as well as a target range and a general effect listed within there. The list of a few very basic psionic equipment items rounds out the chapter. The chapter on Starship operations gives all the details one needs for operating a starship for travel. There's interplanetary travel within a system and a chart to indicate how long travel within a system may take based on your ship's acceleration thrusters. And then there's interstellar travel. Interstellar travel within the Cepheus Deluxe system utilizes a system of jumps from system to system, which may require a series of rolls to ensure you are on target. General expenses for maintaining, fueling, and crewing a ship are listed, as well as things like port fees and revenue from basic passage and freight that you may undertake just to pay the bills. The chapter finishes with some basic rules on the ship's computers and their sensors. Now, the next chapter goes into trading and smuggling in detail and is drastically expanded from what was offered in prior versions. The rules have been drastically expanded from Cepheus Light, offering an entire system for determining the price of goods of various categories, how to determine modifiers based on a starport's stats, how safe an area it's in, whether anything might go bad with a deal, and so forth, and then finishes with an extensive example of trading. And I actually kind of really like this because one of the main draws for me for this kind of game, even though I don't usually like sci-fi games, is things like the Computer Privateer series and old school games like that, where you basically play a space trader out there, and I really like that kind of thing, and how this system, Traveler in general, but especially Cepheus-based systems like this, really support that kind of thing. The chapter on ship design, which is next, begins with a checklist, which is useful mostly for following sections in order, because the following sections
are more of a sort of piecemeal construction system. You just select various components off of various charts. There are ample rules and costs involved in each section, including the time you need to build a particular starship, but it mostly boils down to outfitting a ship of various sizes and chassis according to your budget with the equipment that you can afford. Although, if you're a referee, of course, you probably won't be constrained by exact budgets when detailing ships, but it can be pretty nice to organize them in order. There's plenty of leeway to build ships, all the way from tiny little freighters all the way up to massive battleships, and again the chapter concludes with an example of starship design from top to bottom. The chapter on space combat rules is very much akin to the vehicle rules, using a similar positioning system to abstract things out, although the scale of space combat means that the rounds range from 6 minutes on up to whatever, depending on just what range you're dealing with things, depending on the particular scene. However, since everybody riding in a ship needs to be sure that ship's very survivable, they all have skin in the game, it offers a number of options for each role on a ship, including captains, pilots, gunners, sensor operators, and so forth. Due to the scale of some ships, there's optional rules for dealing with ships with massive numbers of turrets and missile batteries as well. The ship damage charts are much like vehicle damage charts, although a little bit more in-depth in places, with ship damage being done to various systems within a ship, and a short blurb on repairing damage, wrapping things up, before the usual end-of-chapter example. And that's a really fun example, by the way. It goes on for several pages.
The next chapter simply has common spacecraft designs, either ready for purchase by the characters or for use as encounters. Each ship is given a stat block that includes the class, the tonnage, the armor rating, the hull type, maneuver rating, power plant, electronics, armaments, fittings, crew, cost, and any special modules that they may possess, allowing you to readily pluck starships for use out of a hat. Starship Encounters offer some various sample types of encounters one might have while traveling within a system, mostly with other starships, with the idea that even though star systems tend to be extremely large and empty, a lot of traffic will tend to congregate around certain points like habitable worlds, mining areas, jump points, and the like. The chapter on world creation fleshes out the world creation rules from Cepheus Light, offering ways to determine the world size, atmosphere, hydrographics, population, government, law level, and various other components of a world, either by selection or randomly. Each section is described in a bit more detail, allowing one to easily generate a world to explore or select and build a world from the existing menu of options. Social Encounters gives various tools for, well, social encounters. It details the sort of day-to-day encounters one might have with NPCs outside of combat, and includes reaction rolls to determine attitude for those you don't know about. There's a sample encounter table for various circumstances, as well as randomized tables for generating an NPC's traits on the fly, not their combat traits or anything, but just how they look, how they act, that sort of thing. There are some sample NPCs already included, and these do have stats, and they're useful for common roles that you might encounter out in space or on a station or something like that. The Xeno fauna chapter attempts to create a system by which one can generate various animals from either from scratch or by a bit of randomization. There is a certain set of modifiers given by terrain, but this is followed by randomized tables for a variety of basic stats, including your niche and your overall approach to gathering, but then going into like combat stats in there. It's interesting. One can select, say, an herbivore from a forest terrain and like actually select that, and then attempt to generate the character's stats or the creature's stats based on random rolls or by selecting sections in the following tables. So the last two basic chapters are a chapter on referee advice that details building a setting, fleshing that setting out, dealing with higher level play, and handling factions, super science, contacts, and the like. And then there's a collection of adventure seeds. And these adventure seeds are more like frameworks for adventures rather than proper adventures. Each just gives a mission, player information for that mission, and then various complications that you might throw at the players during the adventure. Now, the appendices are very brief. There's Appendix A, which is similar to the classic Appendix N from AD&D, listing inspiration from film, literature, games, and the like. Appendix B
does cover the universal world profile, and that's honestly the first time it's mentioned in any real detail in this version of the game. And in fact, I don't even think I see the universal personnel profile anywhere in here. Appendix C gives a couple ways to try to bring a character back from the dead. Given the sci-fi nature of the setting, that's actually not common, but there's options. You got complete cyborg conversion, you've got bio-reconstruction, that sort of thing. Kind of bringing back the clone from the end or whatever. You've got an appendix on aliens, which includes the classic pop culture greys, reptiloids, and insectoids all statted out for you if you want to play those. And then, let's see, you finally have the legal information, which tells you how you publish your own material for the system. The legal information that covers the license for this, and then the index, before the whole book closes out with a selection of sheets for characters, ships, worlds, that sort of thing. So, yeah, Cepheus Deluxe. Well, as far as its overall layout, it's very similar to Cepheus Lite, using a sort of minimalist design philosophy that makes things easy to read through and reference. Now, I did see one or two minor editing errors, more than I saw in Cepheus Lite, which actually was high on my list for very well edited books. This is also a very well edited book, although this time there are errors I did see. Nothing really game breaking, nothing that really makes the system unusable, and nothing really that really affected the stats. It was all copy editing issues. The selection of classic-looking old-school sci-fi illustration lends itself to a very 90-ish era feel, which is fine. I liked it. I liked it when it was in Cepheus Lite. I like it here, and it's even got a little bit more polish here. I appreciated the overall design. It looks clean, and it looks elegant. Again, I can't help but recall what I said in my Cepheus Lite review, and a lot of it holds true for Cepheus Deluxe. Descriptions and rules are well written, they are easy to follow, and the extensive example system is incredibly helpful, especially for somebody that's new to the game. At the time that I reviewed it, Cepheus Lite was the first and only Cepheus system game that I properly read through, and I appreciated the clarity with the writing. I've read through a few more since then, but haven't had a proper chance to completely look through them. Cepheus Deluxe, however, follows that same mold and should prove almost as friendly to players new to the system as Cepheus Lite. I say almost because there are a few quirks that I noticed, mostly the ordering of how certain information is introduced at first, that could throw somebody new to the system off briefly. It's just an ordering issue. Some concepts aren't properly explained as they are introduced, but rather explained a few pages further in, for instance. Now, it's not hard to find those rules, but I could see where a little bit of notation here and there where the concept is first introduced could go a long way towards clearing things up for a brand new player. The changes that were made to the core rules are very easy to grasp, and I suppose if they make the system more compatible with the existing Cepheus Engine material, that's a good thing. And the use of a stamina and lifeblood system does tend to make characters a little bit more survivable from what I can see, at least in the long run. Combine that with the fact that it is now easier to survive character creation, although it wasn't that hard to do in the first place, makes it just overall a friendlier system for people who are looking to just get into it. Vehicle combat does seem a bit more streamlined and unified, such that combat seems a little bit more internally consistent, and I love systems with internal consistency, all the way from personal to vehicle, all the way up to Starship level combat, and I love that. Where Cepheus Deluxe really shines, though, is just in all the options that it adds without necessarily adding many new rule sets. And this is something that a lot of systems fail, is that they start adding additional stuff and then they just feel the need to make new rule sets for it. This doesn't happen in here. There is a wider variety of equipment, cybernetics, and psionics, fleshing those out into full systems, and yet they're all very rules light and blend seamlessly into the main rule set and the existing rules. The addition of customizable robots is a nice touch, and it works well with the expanded vehicle and spaceship design systems. It all just makes the options within Cepheus Deluxe seem more robust than they did in Cepheus Lite. I also appreciate the random world generation and the Xeno fauna generation rules, although in both instances I feel like they're more a good start and could have done with a touch more work. Specifically for the random world generation, it is robust, but one thing that was mentioned to me by one of my viewers in Cepheus Light, in my Cepheus Light review, was that it might have benefited from some star system generation rules. The world generation system goes a long way towards fixing that, but I feel like a few extra pages of expansion to allow for the generation of entire systems would go even further. And it would have just been absolutely spectacular to be able to generate star maps on the fly. Now, it's not really a criticism so much as it is wishful thinking. The systems in place are fun, and they're so fun, I just wish there were more of them in that regard. Overall, I think the Cepheus Deluxe system itself is a worthy follow-up to Cepheus Light, continuing the old school style rules light system while offering a variety of new options. Yes, I think it could have done with a little tweaking in terms of editing and explanation here and there, but it's still one of the more solidly explained systems that I've read. If I think of Cepheus Light as a sort of BX version of the Cepheus system, I could easily see this as more of a quote-unquote advanced rules, to borrow a sort of D&D analogy. The Cepheus Light is still available, and the difference really boils down to just how in-depth you want your sci-fi universe's options to be. Both offer a streamlined, quickly playable experience, but Cepheus Deluxe just seems like it'd support a little bit more in terms of character development over the long haul, especially when one takes into account that the wealth a character might accumulate during an extended campaign is probably going to be one of their main advancement systems in a level-less system, and the injuries they might accumulate also gives you good reason to start getting into cybernetics and getting to spend money on replacement stuff. And it just kind of boils all together into one nice way to start accumulating the main resource that a campaign would accumulate, and that is money. And on that note, I'm going to say I like the system. I really do. I'm going to wrap it up here. This has been the RPG Crawler with my review of Cepheus Deluxe. As always, I will leave a link to where you can get it below. If you like what you've seen, remember to leave a like, comment if you've got any feedback, and subscribe for more RPG content, both tabletop and computer. Until next time, take care and goodbye.
And if you are still watching, I would like to take the opportunity to thank my supporters, the top tiers of which are listed on the screen, without whose support I would not have been able to offer the variety of content that I have on this channel throughout the years. If you're feeling particularly generous and would like to join them, you can support the channel. There are a variety of options to do so. I have a Patreon, a Subscribestar, as well as channel memberships enabled. If you are not in a position to contribute, simply leaving a like, a comment, or sharing my videos are all wonderful ways to help the channel grow without spending a dime, and are all greatly appreciated.